Hi there, I'm David, and today we're going to talk about externalities, both positive and negative. You ready? Let's go! So, externalities can be positive, negative, and those positive and negative can also be broken down into production and consumption, positive or negative externalities. An externality is something that influences a market as a result of an external factor that may have not been read into or looked at prior. Typically, a company is going to produce something and not really think about the external benefits or the external problems that it might be causing to the population nearby or at a distance. So let's break it down into a little bit of a table here, and we're going to have a little bit of fun at first. So a negative production externality could be something like a teenage rock band. They're drumming away all night, singing, screaming, shouting, and you can't sleep. So that's a creative explanation here. So they're not necessarily making anything, but it's fun to kind of get our head around it. Well, what about consumption? A negative could be beef. So when you have a beef farm, you are producing as much as is needed and a little bit more. So you're going to have more cows than you have orders because that's how supply and demand works, and a cow, once it's gone, is gone. So you're going to have more cows than are required, but because you are predicting that the volume is going to increase or the demand for it is going to increase. What happens when stores order more beef than they sell is that they end up having to throw the extra away. That extra ends up accumulating across all of the stores or supermarkets across a country, an area, or region, whichever those farms are contributing to or delivering to. And as a result, there's going to be runoff from the waste that comes from the cows and from some of the different factors that are included, such as the grain going bad and being tossed aside or burned. There's going to be a lot of different things that are going to affect the general population in the vicinity. So for example, the runoff that comes from the waste that gets washed away ends up in the water table and ends up contaminating it. Of course, there are government regulations to limit this, but it is a very powerful example of consumption-based negative externalities. So let's take a look at a positive consumption externality. Education is a positive externality, but it is also a positive consumption externality. What happens here is that the more that people are educated, the demand for it goes down. Once a person has been educated, they don't need to be educated again. So you graduate high school, are you going to go back to high school? Probably not, unless you really enjoyed being on the junior varsity team. So as that happens, there are some external factors that come into play, such as subsidies, that will end up boosting the overall ability for that industry to be able to function. It's a positive, but it does end up at the detriment of the producer of that good or service. Now let's take a look at a positive production externality. So a beekeeper is going to have a positive impact as he produces honey. So the positive is that the flowers are now pollinating fruits, vegetables, plants all over the area and creating a very healthy ecosystem. For example, if he's got his bees next to an orchard, for example, the orchard is going to benefit tremendously from the bees, and the bees are going to benefit from the orchard because they have shorter to fly and they have more food availability to them, so they're going to produce more honey and more bees overall. Now, a consumption-based positive as a second variant could be investment in technology. So, for example, many people are investing in something like Tesla or SpaceX or various startups that are going IPO, which is going onto the stock market. As that happens, there's more incentive for more companies to innovate. It drives innovation as that occurs. And our second example for a positive production here is a florist's garden. You walk by it and you enjoy the flowers. So you are getting a positive benefit from that garden. Now let's go to our negative production, number 2, a chemical plant. As the chemical plant is producing its products, its goods, it is polluting the area as well. So maybe it's dumping some of its canisters out back, although there should be legal restrictions involved to prevent this. It might be dumping those chemicals anyways, or maybe this was before regulations and polluting both the water tables and, of course, causing damage to the local ecosystem. So, it's not necessarily thinking about that, it's thinking about its own survival as an organization. Now let's take another look at a negative consumption externality, platinum. This is a pretty big deal. When it comes to chips, superconductors, and various other technologies, a lot of things get slowed down because of platinum consumption. If you're always buying the newest device, you're contributing to a loss of a resource, which is getting harder and harder to find. Platinum is very rare on planet Earth. It's not so rare on the moon, so it's probably a good idea we get up there. But in the end, this leads to something called the tragedy of the commons, which you can find here. So be sure to check that out. So what are some of the effects these things have on the economic model of that organization overall? So if a producer of chemicals is causing there to be trouble for the local population by polluting the water tables, a government might come in and place restrictions and also increase taxes on that company specifically to prevent them from overproducing their good. And the reason for this is that if they are overproducing their good, well, not enough demand is happening, and it reduces the supply down to a more optimal solution. When it comes to cows, for example, consumption, there might be a regulation in place that says that a supermarket can only order 1.05 its usual consumption requirements from its customers so that the overgrowth or the excess is managed. When it comes to education, as we said, there were subsidies, and there are also subsidies in technologies when it comes to our positive consumption here. So those subsidies being grants or various other funding that can be provided to those institutions or organizations. When it comes to positive production, well, there's not really much that can be done, but it also falls into line with a service that an organization doesn't necessarily have the ability to force people to pay for, which you can find also in another video. So that'll be up here. So when it comes to those charts, it's really not so complicated if you think about it. So if somebody is producing chemicals, they're probably producing too many chemicals, so their supply is high. The government comes in, increases taxes, reducing supply, and thereby also mitigating the amount of external negative effects that it has on the local population. Alternatively, when the government comes in and subsidizes the education sphere, it then helps the supply-demand curve to come to an optimal solution so that the education system isn't suffering and then dying out in the economic state that it would be because people don't want to go to high school twice. All right, let's move on to some questions that you're going to encounter on your tests. So our first question here is going to be, the existence of a negative externality will result in more than the social optimum amount of a good to be produced unless the government intervenes. True or false? Ding, 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 it is true. However, try to remember that there are various other means that can happen here when it comes to externalities. You can view some of our other videos to understand how. The next question is, from society's point of view, a good that has a positive externality associated with it, like education, would be underproduced by a market system with no government intervention. True or false? Ding, ding, ding. Yes, it's going to have some trouble because, again, people aren't going to want to go to high school twice. All right, so the next question is, firms that cause negative externalities are sometimes allowed to produce more output than is socially optimum because A, marginal internal costs are high, B, marginal external costs are minimal, C, marginal social costs do not exist, D, all of the above are true. B. It's going to be B. Marginal external costs are minimal. So if you don't have a lot of external costs, you're able to continue producing. However, this has a caveat. Remember, this is the answer for your test, but when it comes to the real world, you're going to have some differences here. Imagine a bakery that has a diesel generator powering it. It stinks. It stinks very, very much, and it causes a negative externality to the local population. Even the docs say no. But they're not going to produce more bread than is optimum for themselves because it would then be a waste of resources. So even though their external costs are minimum, because nobody has come up to them and said, hey, could you stop that or pay me because your diesel generator is keeping me up at night and I can't breathe. So if you have any questions, please leave a comment below. I hope you learned something today. Don't forget to subscribe, check out other videos, like, share, hit that bell for notifications on future videos, and we'll see you next time.